Okay, so good morning, everyone. Um, we looked at what is social media in the past few weeks. So I think it's now time to get into the programming side of the social media. Okay, meaning we looked at what is social media and how the social media is used. We also looked at the legal side of it, as in what kind of legal issues are there. Then there is a thing called intellectual property, whatnot. Okay, so those are information about what is social media. So today I thought we will get down to the software part of the social media, because our unit here is to understand what are the techniques used in social media. So one thing we will be using very often with social media is social authentication, right? You may have seen now, for example, even our LMS. Yes, you do have a username and a password, but you notice there is a little button on the other side where it says login with Google, right? And since we are using Google as our service provider for email and Drive and other things, it is very natural that we use the same thing to authenticate our other services. Now we use Google authentication for our LMS. LMS is actually a software called Moodle. So Moodle has a connection to Google to authenticate our users. Similarly, we have a library system called Koha. Again, uses the Google authentication system. So Koha is one tool, uses Google as the authentication tool. So there is also Sims, for example, is a ERP application and again uses Google for authentication. So the advantage is this: if you don't have this social login, you may be given 3 or 4 usernames and passwords. Probably the same username as email, but different password for different applications. Or even the same password, but you have to actually log into each one separately. Okay, which is very inconvenient given the fact that we are already using so many different software and each one has their own username and password, and here we are going to use another one, right, for multiple. So that's not very convenient. So social authentication give us the facility to just use one application, maybe Google, maybe Facebook, maybe LinkedIn, whatever it may be, so that if you are already logged in, you don't need to again type username password in order to log into another application. So for example, at SLTC, if you're logged into your email, you don't have to again log in. I mean, you don't have to again type username and password to log into the LMS, the learning management system, right? So you press the button, log in with Google, and that's it. You're in. Okay. So let's try to understand how this works. There are also some security concerns, and there are certain fundamental knowledge that we need to understand when we are doing that. And we'll also look at very basic code today, which is JavaScript code. But then later we will write an application that uses multiple social media platforms to log into, and our own application, right? So I'm planning to use Laravel perhaps next week, and then see whether we can use Google or Facebook or Microsoft to log in to the system. Right. So, like I said, before we get into the social authentication business, we need to understand one very, very important technology. This is called OAuth, right? O, Open Authentication Mechanism. Now, what does that mean? It's a framework that allows applications to access user data from other applications or services without exposing the user credentials like username and password. So in simply, what it says is that if you are typing username and password to log into the Google, you don't have to remember another username and another password to log into LMS, right? But we do have a problem. So are we sharing the Google username password with LMS? No, we are not using that. That is not how it works. It uses something instead of the username and password. We use the term token for that. So when I log into Google, it will give us a token to be used with LMS, for example. So LMS does not have access directly to our Google account. There is only a token there. Okay. So that way, lots of different advantages there. We will see one by one. So let's first talk about open authentication, because that is the technology we are going to use to manage all our authentication. So as it says, think of OAuth. Let me move it down. As a, and here's an example actually, right? So you are giving, let's say you have a room and you have a lock, right? To lock that room. So OAuth is like you are giving them another extra key with limited access. Okay. So you never give them the master key. You are giving them another key with some limited timeline. So they may be able to use it for, let's say, 1 hour. After that, the key is expired. Let's say the key is self-destructing. They can't use that key again. Okay. So that is an example of how open authentication works. You never share the master key with the user. Okay. So under this, there are certain roles. There are certain, we don't use the word people because these are software systems. So we use the term role. So number one is the resource owner. That is me. So I'm trying to log in. Okay. So I'm trying to log into my own Google account. So that is me, right? Who owns the data. And the client is the application that want to access your data, right? Let's say I am trying to access LMS, right? So that's my client, okay? So the resource server is where the authentication data is, that is the authorization server. So authorization server is where my credentials are stored, my username and the password, so that I can access and say or prove that it's me, right? And then the resource server is where the data is stored. Okay. So I use Google authorization server to log in as the resource owner. And then from there, I go to the resource server, which is the LMS, right? To access my information that is accessible to me. All right. So that's how the roles are working here. So here's the process. So if you break it down into step by step, first is the authorization request. Now, say for example, my LMS, I'm trying to access LMS. So I go and press the button saying login with Google, right? So I press the button. So authorization request is now coming to Google Auth Serve, right? So that is where the user authorization is working. So then you will see a pop-up saying, okay, please log into your Google account. Right. So I am the owner. So I had to prove that it is me. So I type my username and the password and I log in. And then when I do that, the authorization grant goes back to LMS saying, okay, Google has given the LMS the access to use the system. And then the LMS will request something called a token. So with the information LMS received from Google Auth Server, LMS is now requesting a token. So that is called access token request. Send authorization grant to the authorization server, which is Google, and ask for an access token. And then the authorization server is sending an access token to LMS. So access token response. That's the next step. Okay. And then access token is basically a string. It's a large string, and I need to store that in my application. So if I'm the one written the LMS, I need to store that in memory. You never store that in the database, right? Don't store the token ever in the database. Generally, we store that in memory, and if you shut down the computer, it gets destroyed. So don't store anywhere. And then every time I want to access it, I meaning every time when the LMS wants to access the data, it uses the token. Okay. So now authentication is done, token is there, and then that token is the one I'm using instead of my username and password to access my information on the LMS. Okay, so that's the process. So in summary, first I go to my client, which is the LMS in my example. And then there I press the button saying login with Google, goes to Google, and then I log into Google with that pop-up. And Google is sending something called the authorization grant. And that with that grant, LMS is again requesting a token from Google. Google is sending that back to LMS. And that token is the one LMS will be using to subsequent login and access of information. And remember, each token has a timeline, as in it's got time to live, TTS, right? TTL. So 1 hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe 6 hours, maybe whatever. So here's the diagram in a simple form. So I go to my client, which is the LMS, and I press the login button, right? It goes to, let's say, authentication server. It can be Facebook, Google, anything, right? And then I need to log in there, and then I need to say allow or deny, right? And then a token is given to the client, and then client is using that to access the resource server. So that can be my application, database, retrieving some information, or whatever, right? So this is how the system is interconnected. By writing a little application, we can see how it works. There are also other various components available. There is something called passport, apart from OAuth. And then there are a few things like that. As we move forward, we will learn that as well to make our life easy. So coming back to the token, because token is very, very important. It's a very special key, right? And also it's specific access for a limited time. Remember, specific access for a limited time, right? And also it does not give away your master key. Never. You're not sharing the username or password. Never, when you're using the social login, which is very important as well. Right. So here's an example. Again, another example, right? Say we have a photo editing app, all right? And you want to access that. Let's say we wrote that application. So we wrote this photo editing application, and we want to have, we want to access Google Photos into that, right? So I have a photo editing application. I want to access Google Photos with this application. So what do I do? So first, the resource owner, I open my photo editing application, call the client, and then the app is asking, okay, can I access your Google Photos? All right. So I say, fine. So if I say, okay, then it goes to, it will redirect me to Google login page called the authorization page, right? Where you see, please log into Google, username and the password, right? And then you log into the Google Auth server, that is number 3. So that is where you grant permission to the app to access your photos. Then Google is sending the authorization grant. Google sends this grant back to the photo editing app. So the photo editing app now has granted, it can access information. And then the app is requesting a token from Google with that grant. That is number 5. And Google now sends a string, which called the access token, to our application. And then our application can use that token and go to Google Photos and download the pictures or access those pictures. I hope you understand the scenario here, right? So Google never sent username and password to our photo editing application. So as you can see at the bottom, it says by using OAuth, you can securely give photo editing app access to your photos without sharing your Google password. And you can revoke this access at any time from your Google account settings. Okay. Right. So that's the introduction to OAuth. Of course, there is OAuth 1 and OAuth 2 also now to increase security. There is also other additional things coming under OAuth 2. So before we use social authentication, we also need to make sure that we are using the latest version. And also, if there are any other additional plugin and whatnot, we must be using that as well. I'm sharing a few videos and links as well. So please have a look at it, because although we see social authentication as a very good way, there is some hijacking possible, right? So we got to be very careful with those. And of course, there are other ways of getting rid of that also. So we need to know the big picture before we use any social login. So here's a typical login page for an application. This can be our LMS, this can be our photo editing application, this can be our library system, whatever, right? Now, if you notice carefully, there are 4 ways to log into this application. The usual username, password is the usual way of logging in, or you can use Facebook to log in, Twitter to log in, or Google to log in. Meaning, if you're already logged into your Facebook now, rather than typing username and password, you can press this button and you will be automatically taken to the application. Or if you're logged into Twitter already, press the button, it'll take you in there. Twitter is now called X, by the way, so the icon is different. So G Plus was also the Google's social media platform that is not available anymore, but that's the icon we see when it comes to login. So this is a typical login page that can be used for any application. So if you're planning to build an application later with social login, this can be a good sample. Right? So what is social authentication? The definition is a method of verifying user identity through social connections or social media platforms. Right? So we use the already logged in social media platform to verify or authenticate the user. Right? Why is it important? Enhances the security, simplifies login process, and also reduce reliance on traditional passwords. Now, remember I said you don't need to remember the password, isn't it? Now, going back to the screen, if you don't use social login, you may have to remember another username and another password every time you want to log in here. But if you're using social login, you don't need to remember that. All right, so let's start with Facebook. Okay, very famous. Many people are logged in Facebook anyways. So if that is the case, they can just press a button and go into your other application. So it allows users to log into third-party apps using their Facebook credentials. Very convenient. And also gives a lot of rich personalized information. In fact, the application also can use Facebook information. There is something called the Graph interface through Graph API. Through that, it can also read, for example, the username, email address, and if you allow other things as well, like your friends and various things can be accessed through the system. For authentication, it uses OAuth 2 protocol. And also there is a Facebook SDK that gets incorporated. So if you're using, let's say, a JavaScript based application, it's a JS file that you need to plug into your website as well. So through that, you can use all kind of stuff. After you log in with Facebook, you can continue with your client application if you don't want anything with Facebook, or you can use the Facebook SDK to talk to Facebook as well. Okay, so this is suitable for social media platforms. If you have social media related anything, okay, then Facebook login might be a good option. Next is Google login. If you are a Google person, if you use Google very frequently, well, then you can have Google access as well. Like at SLTC, we are heavily on Google. So all our authentication works on Google, right? So it enables users to sign in using their Google account. The advantages are trusted by many and also secure, and seamless integration with Google services. So as you know, in our campus, we use Google Drive heavily to share things between users. And then Google also has their Office applications, the Word, presentations, and everything. And there are so much of information you can access through the Google system. And it uses, again, OAuth 2 protocol. And Google's auth server is known as Google Identity Platform. Right? So we are not talking Gmail, okay? We are talking Google. Remember that. Google Authentication Platform is what we are using. Gmail is one of the clients that is using Google. So where can we use this? Where is it famous for? This is famous for mobile applications and also any other online application. And then the third most famous one is Twitter login. Enable users to sign in using their Twitter account. Quick and easy to set up, very simple to set up. But the thing is, in Sri Lanka at least, not many people use Twitter. In Sri Lanka, the famous ones are Google and also Facebook, right? Now, be careful. Twitter uses both OAuth 1 and OAuth 2 protocol. So when you are connecting Twitter, you need to be very careful about which one you are using, right? Preferably OAuth 2, but sometimes depending on your library, you may be using version 1. So be careful there. And that access also gives you Twitter API integration. So in case if you want to access the Twitter information of the logged in user, you can, right? So where is it famous for? Well, if you're building a blogging platform or a news website, probably Twitter login will be a nice addition to have, because people who are coming there may be already using Twitter. So it makes sense for them to use the Twitter login. And then LinkedIn is also becoming very famous nowadays, but not extremely famous like Facebook or Google. So if you already have a LinkedIn account and if you're logged into it, you can use that to log into the third-party application. This is okay, or rather, this is very famous among the professional users, and things like employment, educational data can be accessed through this. And also, this has more credibility than Facebook, right? Facebook is, full of fun and entertainment and whatever, but LinkedIn is very professional. Yeah. So if you want the professional information of the people who are using your application, then probably you can have LinkedIn authentication there. And it uses OAuth 2 and also has LinkedIn API integration facility. So where can we use it? Or actually not where is recommended. Job portals and also professional networking. If that is something that you are building, then LinkedIn login might be a good idea to have. Then another very famous one is the GitHub authentication, very famous among the developers, because we use GitHub to host pretty much all our code. So trusted by the developer community, and also access to repositories and developer profiles. So once someone logs in with GitHub, you can access that through the GitHub API integration, some information about the user, their code repos and commit frequencies and various things. And this also uses OAuth 2 protocol. So where is it more suitable? For developer tools, code hosting platforms, things like that. And then another very interesting one is the Amazon Cognito authentication. So Amazon is giving backend services like Google to many companies out there to run their servers and whatnot. Now, Cognito is coming as an Amazon web service, so AWS solution for authentication. Now, there is a term called federation, right? Federation is interesting because federation allows you to access multiple suppliers. So when you have an account with AWS Cognito, you can through that also get into other social mediums like Facebook and Google and all that, right? That's a big advantage we have with Amazon Cognito. But then again, not many people will have that unless you are an AWS developer. Okay. This also support multiple social providers, very scalable. So scalability wise very good, and it has a very tight integration with AWS, and it uses OAuth 2, and then this is suitable for both websites as well as for mobiles, plus also good for e-commerce platforms. See, okay. Now let's look at a code example. Right now, this is written using JavaScript. Okay, probably running as an express action for node server. Now, I selected because it's pretty simple to understand. We need to include certain libraries. There's Express library, Axios library is included. And then here we go. So auth redirect is our URL or our route. And to that, when someone comes to this, we will be making a post call to whatever URL you want. So you need to replace this with, let's say, Google or Facebook or whatever there. Okay. And now in order to do that, you need three things: client ID, client secret, and also redirect URL. Now, who's giving the client ID and the client secret? This is coming from the social provider. So if you are using, let's say, Facebook, for example, you need to first log into Facebook, create a Facebook application. All right. So this is not a Facebook profile or a page. You have to create a Facebook application, and then you will get the client ID and the client secret. So you need to bring that in here and then plug into your source code. Right. So once you have that, then you can use, let's say, Facebook login with your platform. So this is the explanation of that, right? So we are using Express.js to handle OAuth 2 authorization. This is called the code flow, by the way. So when the user authorizes your application on the OAuth provider side, they are redirected back to your application with an authorization code. So what we need to do is actually, this is the callback coming from the social platform, right? So when the callback comes in, you can get the authorization code from here, right? So this is a request object. We are running a query on that, and then from there we get the code. So this is the authorization code. So we are sending the authorization code, right, to the token request URL. And then when we get the token, then we store that called access token here, and then we will be using it throughout the rest of the program. There we go. So it says, when the user authorizes your application on the OAuth provider side, they are redirected back to your application with an authorization code. This code is then exchanged for an access token by making a post request to the auth provider's token endpoint. The access token can then be used to make authorized API requests on behalf of the user. So now we also need endpoints. Okay. We need the endpoint mean. Endpoint is coming from the social platform. So if you're using Facebook, you need to go do some reading, and there you will notice the endpoints. It will say, okay, use this endpoint for a callback or requesting authorization code or the token. There is also another one we will discuss later called the refreshing the token. Now, remember, we said the token is time bound. So the token might expire after 1 hour. So what happens after the 1 hour? The user may not be able to access a site. So maybe they can request an extension to the timeout, right? So for that also there is a endpoint in most of these places. Right. So what are some of the benefits of social authentication? Number one is enhanced user experience, isn't it? So we are giving the facility to the user to not to remember any special username and password for our application, and make it single sign-on. It's called SSO, single sign-on to our application, right? Of course, you have to write code for each and every platform. So if you want to give access to Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn and GitHub, you have to then write code for each one, and then have a different callback route for each one as well. Okay. So the social authentication gives improved security, because you are now giving the responsibility of authentication to a third party, right? So they have the best hardware, best software, and they will take care of that. So we don't need to worry about it. Reduces password fatigue and phishing attack. What is password fatigue? Fatigue is, getting tired. So if you have so many passwords and so many username to so many different platforms, sooner or later, you are going to have the same password for everything. And if you lose it once, right, through a phishing attack, you're going to lose everything. So rather than doing that, if you use social password or authentication, you just need to remember only one or one or two or three, right? And use that to access anything else. And also, another very good additional thing is now, since you log in from a social platform, you can use the SDK or the API provided from the social media platform to get additional user information. Let's say you want to get the mobile number, you want to get their email address, you want to get what they like, their friends, you can do that. Of course, provided the user, the creator is given grant to the application, right? So just because people are requesting, you don't have to give. There are certain rules there also. That's where the legalities is coming in. So, for example, now when you install an application, a game, for example, this is very famous on Facebook. You install a game, and then it is asking you for certain permissions, and many people don't read that. They just say accept, right? Now you may be giving access to send messages to every friend in your list. Now you might have 5,000 friends. Imagine every friend will be getting a request or something or the other from this client program, and then they can also access their friends also. In fact, there was a major social media issue from a company called Cambridge Analytica. We'll discuss that on another day, where they were using Facebook to connect from. Now, if I use their game, they will have everything about myself, my like, what I don't like, where I click the like button, where I click the angry button, everything, plus all my friends, right? And they were taken to courts, and the company was shut down. That was a serious issue. All right. So, what are some of the challenges and best practices when it comes to social authentication? Number one is privacy concern. So, where are we storing this information and how secure this is? Now, the applications I showed so far, sort of okay because they're sort of secure, but then we got to be careful with the others, right? And also, especially the data protection regulations, you need to make sure are in place. Next one is dependency on third-party platforms. Now, what if Google gets cracked? What if GitHub user database is stolen by someone, right? If they have the password and usernames, then they will be able to access our other applications also. That's a big issue, but well, of course, it's very, very rare. Plus, even if they access it, the passwords are usually encrypted, so it will be useless data. And then potential impact of API changes. Now, you may be writing the code expecting a certain API after reading the documentation. Let's say after 6 months or 1 year, maybe 2 years, Facebook will change their APIs or the endpoints. Now, your program will not work because the endpoints are now not working. So that is another challenge we may be facing. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And then the user trust, right? Some people who don't know those platforms might not trust them, and so they will not log into your system. All right. And they may be also thinking that you're sharing data. All right. So you can actually access data provided they give permission. So that's one concern as well. Am I going to lose my data by logging in using social authentication? All right. So what are some of the best practices we can use when it comes to social authentication? Number one, transparency. Clearly communicate data usage policy. So if you are planning to access their private information, their friends and whatever, you better make sure you have a policy document that says that you are going to do that. Okay, you can't do that secretly. And then you must get the user consent. Consent means getting their okay, right? You have to obtain explicit consent for accessing user data. You can't do it secretly. You will get into a lot of legal trouble. And then the security measures. Use secure authentication protocol like OAuth 2, not OAuth 1. And also SSL is required here. And regularly update and monitor integration. So Now, since you've done the integration part, make sure your side of the code is secure, right? We can't do anything about the social authentication providers, but we can look at what we have done and what we can do on our side. And then if it doesn't go through, we also need to have something called the fallback option. Provide alternative login methods, right? Ensure accessibility if social login fails. So in my screen, I showed you there is a username and a password available. And also there were Facebook and Google and also LinkedIn. Yeah, interesting. Twitter. So if Facebook doesn't work, they can use the Twitter login. If Twitter also doesn't work, they can use Google. If Google also doesn't work, then they can use the username and password. So we have to give certain alternatives in case if it doesn't work. Because due to some global reason, global server outage, Google might not work, right? It is possible. It has happened also. So in that case, I should be able to use another provider. All right, so let's look at some pictures here to understand what is going on, right? So on the left, we have the legitimate OAuth 2 app. So we have the application, and this is a security breach, okay? So number one, I request authorization from the through the browser to the authorization server. Okay, so the server is now sending authorization code. Now that is coming through the browser, isn't it? If someone can write code to intercept this data in the browser, like say a JavaScript code, this can be done, by the way. So then they will intercept the data packet and then send it to somebody else, a malicious app. And the malicious app can then use that authorization code to get the access token from the server. Right? So the authorization code can be hijacked. It is possible. Here's another one, right? Actually, the solution here. So if that is the case, what can we do? Number one is your storage, wherever you're storing your data, have encryption there. So one problem is insecure storage, exposing the client secrets. Number two, broad scope. So don't give full access to everyone. Now you can actually bring in limited access, saying, okay, they can access only the entry, they access only the user emails, something like that. So for that, with scope, for the you can specify which scope you open up. And the token validate the access to. So you are getting the token, but then you're not using to validate. That's also a common mistake people do when it comes to programming. So always send the token every time you want to access the resource. Right? Now, let me share a small website now. Okay, so I will share the links on the LMS. So this one is about a very good article about avoiding security missteps with OAuth 2 implementation, right? So this is an explanation of how things can go wrong. Yeah, common pitfalls and how to avoid them. So insecure storage and countermeasure. What to do about that? Use specialized secret management services. Encrypt client secret before storing them. Regularly rotate and update client secrets. Limit access to client secrets only to necessary personnel. So personnel as in, we're not talking about humans here. You remember we need to get secret from the servers. So in the code, you notice here, right? So we need to get a client ID and the client secret. So this secret can be regenerated. So time to time, regenerate it and update your social media account as well as your application. So that way, even if someone steals it later, they cannot use it. right? Inadequate scope limitation. So you can have this called scope, right? Read profile. So you're giving scope only to read the profile. So in that case, they can't write or update the profile. Lack of token validation. Access tokens are the golden tickets. So yeah, so we don't validate. So by this has some code snippets also for you to have a look. So you have to run the verification method. Right? You have to verify your token. Otherwise, you may be using somebody else's token, or someone without a token can access the data as well. Right? Now, there is a solution for this. It's called PKCE, PKCE for public clients. Right? It's called stand for Proof Key for Code Exchange. Now, what does that do? By generating a unique code verifier for each authorization request and is derived code exchange, a challenge, PKC ensures that only the genuine client can exchange the authorization code. Now, remember, we had an issue with the authorization code getting hijacked. Now, that can be secured using this. So, for that, there's another nice article explaining this. What is PKC? So, here we go. So, the authorization request is now secured. So, that way, this hijacking cannot be done, right? Sasha, both of these articles, have a look at it. So today we looked at social authentication. Social authentication is very convenient for users because we don't have to remember usernames and passwords for each and every application. And then we realize OAuth is the primary driver behind this whole social authentication business. And then there are two versions, version 1 and version 2. And this is not perfect. There can be other issues also, like hijacking of the authorization request or the grant, actually the grant. So there are other solutions like Pixie, for example, that is helping us overcome that as well. Right. So next week, we will look at a real application that is using this method so that we can put that into practice. Please check the LMS for other additional information and also some midterm related information.